Welcome, welcome everyone to the Be, Create, Inspire podcast, where we focus on being so that we can create and inspire the world, one action, one project, one idea at a time. And today I have the pleasure to bring on Dr. Meredith Calvert, one of my most amazing clients, but also a friend and a colleague in the wellness industry. So welcome, Dr. Meredith.
Excellent. Thanks, Ari. Really excited to be here with you today.
And do you want me to call you Dr. Meredith the whole time, or?
No, you can just call me Meredith.
I love it though. It just feels so like fancy. I'm like, yes, Dr. Meredith.
Well, I did work my butt off for it.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, everywhere, doctor. So one thing that I've always loved about you, I mean, and we've known each other for a year plus. First of all, you have such cool, like this blend of the woo and the science, right? So I would love for you to tell people why it's Dr. Meredith and what you do and why you're just so amazing.
Absolutely. No, well, thanks so much, Ari. Yeah. So I guess my own background, I came into sort of yoga and mindfulness and, the woo, if you will. I stumbled into all of that really in graduate school. So I was working towards my PhD in cell and molecular biology, with kind of a focus on neuroscience. And at that time, I was incredibly stressed out. Obviously, getting a doctorate is a lot of work. And things were just completely overwhelming, just between the lab work, the schoolwork, all of it. And so at the time, I came across yoga really quite by accident. I had a good friend who was opening a yoga studio. It's actually one of the first Bikram yoga studios in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I was during my PhD. And as the yoga studio opened, she really just needed people in the studio. So she was asking her friends to come show up so that when people were walking by the windows, they didn't see a totally empty studio. So I had, no experience with yoga before that. Walked into the class, feeling fairly skeptical, but just doing a favor for a friend. And 90 minutes later, I emerged completely drenched in my own sweat and just totally transformed. It was like it took me into this place where for those 90 minutes, I didn't have that stress and the to-do lists and all of the million things running through my head. It was like all of that just stopped. And it was such a magical experience to kind of be there with that, really centered, focused mind. And so I was, immediately hooked. So I've been practicing yoga now for more than 20 years. Actually, that was sort of when I discovered it. But anyway, it was really at that time that I realized the balance that it could provide to my life. And I really credit yoga and then, also learning about meditation and so on as being able to get through that time. And then, like I said, it's been a part of my life ever since. And I think where it gets interesting is that the science is really just now starting to catch up with what the yogis have known for thousands of years, which is like, this stuff really works, right? And now we're just beginning to understand why. So it's an exciting time to be both a scientist and a yogi.
And so let's talk a little bit about the science of it, because I find that so fascinating what you just said, that the science is just starting to come out. And I have a few questions around that. One, why? Why do you think is it lack of technology, or it just wasn't that, it wasn't trendy, so there wasn't budget allocated? Like, tell me why.
Right. Well, I think part of it is that, obviously yoga, mindfulness, these sort of, holistic wellness practices have become so much popular just in the mainstream in general. And so, of course, as things become more popular, that also opens up funding opportunities for the research to be done. There's as more and more of the public are adopting these practices, there's this understanding that it's not this sort of esoteric woo-woo thing, but, there are actually important neurological, physiological, physiological changes occurring with these practices. So I think that's part of it, is just as, as society in general kind of wakes up to the power of these practices, that the science has an opportunity to kind of go there and see why it works. So I think that's a big piece. The other part of it is that, our scientific tools are advancing all the time. And so the types of things that we can explore and measure as the technology improves, we have more ways to be able to kind of dig into to some of these other practices and deeper questions. Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about what are some of, other than, oh yes, doing pranayama, doing breath work does relax you. Like, have there been any other wow, huge ahas? Because you as a neuroscientist, and I know right now you work in a field adjacent to neuroscience, right? But still, knowing what you know, tell us a little bit about maybe some of these findings, and then I really want to talk about the things that you've been creating lately that are kind of leaning people who are, because here's the thing, we think, oh, everybody practices yoga, at this point, right? Oh, everybody, but there's 8 billion people in the planet. I guarantee you it's still a smaller fraction than what we would think, because there's so many people that are still very skeptical about it. So I think what you do, and some of the work that we've gotten to do is showcase this beautiful middle ground, or okay, fine, maybe yoga seems a little far off for you, but scientific based breath work, aka pranayama, might be more applicable per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's a great question. Yeah, I think one of the big sort of breakthroughs in terms of really understanding how, again, yoga and mindfulness practices are able to help us at a neurological level, it was with polyvagal theory. So, not to get too deep and nerdy here, but it was really this.
You can.
I love it. So through studies of neuroimaging, looking at different neuroactivation patterns, people began to understand the role of the vagus nerve in the stress response. And I always like to say that the vagus nerve is sort of like the one ring that controls them all. Mm. So it's one of the biggest cranial nerves, and it connects the brain to the entire periphery. So it travels all throughout the body, and it's the nerve that becomes activated when we switch from what's known as our sympathetic nervous state to our parasympathetic nervous state. So I feel like this is being talked about more and more in sort of popular science, which is great. But what we know is that the sympathetic nervous system is really what controls our stress response at a physiological level. This is our fight, flight, and freeze response. And so this response was really evolved. You can think of it back to kind of caveman times. It was really evolved to help us remove ourselves from immediate danger. Right. So it's all about how do we prep the body to be able to get away from danger in sort of an immediate, acute way. Now, of course, what's happening in our current society is that stress response stays triggered all the time. So we, between our emails, our jobs, the traffic, all of the things, right? The 24-hour news cycle, is we just stay in this permanently activated state. So we sort of get stuck in that sympathetic nervous system way of reacting to the world. And with that, so if we look at what happens in the body short term, you have elevated heart rate. Right? The blood flows away from the internal organs out to the periphery. That's all fantastic if you're trying to run away from a fire, right? Or run away from a tiger. But when you stay in that state, what we're beginning to understand is there's these really pretty negative long-term consequences of staying activated. And you can actually see that just from sort of looking at what are the medical things that people are facing today. I heard a pretty phenomenal statistic recently, which is that 75% of ER visits are thought to be ultimately stress related. And isn't that crazy? 75%.
Oh my God. No, that's huge. I just I had a moment.
Yeah, it kind of took my breath away too.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, right, the heart disease, chronic high blood pressure, metabolic problems such as we're seeing with the obesity epidemic, increases in type 2 diabetes, all of these things we now really understand are very are clearly linked to this sort of chronic activation of the stress response. So we're all suffering from it. I think another thing we saw was that, of course, during the pandemic, everybody's stress levels rose even more, right? No surprise there. I mean, we were all facing a global crisis. So there was some extreme stress experienced. What was interesting and surprising is that the stress levels never went back down. So it's almost like we were already in this baseline, hyperactivated, stressed out state. The pandemic just added to that, but then we've never really recovered if you look at the statistics. So I think that's why these tools, yoga, mindfulness, breathwork, and so on are really so important now.
I'm still stuck on that 75%. Like you've kept talking and all I kept thinking about was that. I was like, how bad does stress need to be for somebody to go to the ER? Like I avoid or I even avoid urgent care like the plague, but ER, that's huge. And sad at the same time, that we're put under such levels of stress, like there's no bear, but yet we're falling into almost a scenario where as if a bear did attack. Because I mean, if you are in the ER, it's because you're obviously properly ill, So
right, absolutely. And a lot of these illnesses, again, we didn't really understand how stress was this kind of underlying cause. But
and so if we get a little nerdy still for a moment, and for you guys, I think it's so cool. I'm such a why person and a how person that knowing the subtleties of things like actually really excites me. So let's talk about the vagus nerve. Okay. I love that you showed us, gave us a good picture, the room that controls everything. Now, how do we know when the practices that we're doing, right? Like because I think for me and most people, right, I'm going to assume here, you guys know I don't like to project, but I'm going to say me and, we do these practices, we work out, we really focus on, being well to them. And I think we spoke about this on our Instagram live. I asked a similar question, like, when do we know when we're off kilter? Because what I understand is that let's say stress level is baseline, right? We're fine. Like my child, right? Your kids, stress level, minor. Maybe they need to practice a little gymnastics, do some homework, but we're blessed that stress level is low. Now, stress keeps accumulating and all we do is just get accustomed, right? So we're okay being a little stressed. We're like, well, it's still okay. And then it gets a little heightened and then we're still okay. So we keep adapting to these extreme, heightened all the way to extreme levels of stress. And we keep being okay with it until we're not okay with it. So what kind of practices would you say are the most effective? Let's say, let's go from like just 3 levels. Heightened, like panic anxiety, right? Middle level stress and maintenance. Maybe we can talk about it like that so that we can really put them in 3 buckets. I love my buckets.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think this is great too, because I really like to think of, yoga, breath work, mindfulness. These are all tools, right? These are all tools that we can have in our toolbox. And, I always encourage my students when I'm working with people that, you have to understand which tools work for you in specific cases. It's like any other type of medical intervention, if you will. It's got to work for you, for your body, for your physiology, for your type of stress. So there's no sort of prescriptive application here.
Of course.
But what I would say is that for, kind of acute stress, right? That's when we're really experiencing that panic in the moment, when we just suddenly feel that sort of total overwhelm. It can often block our kind of reason or thinking. It actually, has been shown acute stress really disrupts the prefrontal cortex. This is where we have all of our higher cognitive power, decision making, and so on. So, when we get into that acute stress situation, we tend not to really be able to think clearly anymore. And so one of the kind of immediate, simplest go-to tools is just to extend the exhale. It sounds incredibly simple, but just that taking that exhale, letting it be a little bit slower, longer, and more controlled. This has been shown to be one of the most effective sort of tools for overcoming that anxiety in the moment. So that's my kind of go-to again for really, really acute stress in the moment. It's also easy to remember. So when you're in that flustered mind, if you can just remember, exhale, right? It can do a lot to switch us from that sympathetic state back into the parasympathetic. Yeah.
Straight A student here. Why the exhale and not the, and to me, it sounds like the inhale would have almost the same effect. So why?
Yeah, that's great. So if there's a few different ways that we can look at this. So one of the things is that the stress activation system, it happens in a feedback loop, right? So we feel that initial stressor, and the body's initial response to that is to elevate the breathing rate, elevate the heart rate. And again, that's all really about giving us the power to be able to run, right? Or fight, or, be able to physically respond to whatever the threat is. And the shorter the breath gets, the more that tells our nervous system that we're in danger and we need to keep running. So experience the stress, the breath rate speeds up. That elevated breath rate is then what sort of maintains the stress response. So that feedback loop will just amplify and amplify and amplify. And it's built to do that, right? This is a beautiful system. This is what we need to be able to get ourselves away from danger. But again, we're often experiencing this response in an inappropriate way. So what we're doing by extending the exhale is we're consciously breaking that feedback loop. We're just basically stopping that amplification from happening. And so that's kind of step one of recovering our kind of normal balanced state there. So that's sort of what the breath thing is doing in the immediate. The other thing is it's sort of counterintuitive, but when we're feeling that stress and we're feeling that elevated breath rate, we're actually hyperventilating. So you may not think it, but we're only inhaling and exhaling at the very top of the lungs. And this can actually cause almost too much oxygen to be getting into the system. So we're not exhaling completely to let the CO2 leave, right, with the exhale. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to lower the CO2 levels with that extended exhale, and then at the same time kind of breaking that feedback loop. So works there in a few different ways, but super simple and incredibly effective.
And so would somebody need to do this exhale 5 times, 1 time, 10 times? Like what's again, we're not prescribing anything because we're all different. And I know I feel better when I just do 1, but I've never luckily been in a panic state. So I don't know what that feels like, but I'm wondering, do you know if there's data behind it? Like, is it 30 seconds?
Right. I would say in terms of kind of restoring normal CO2 levels and having that effect of breaking the feedback loop, you're going to want to take at least a few cycles of breath. I would say kind of minimum 5 or 6 breaths is a great place to start. The other thing, of course, is just being in your body, right? Feeling embodied, listening to your body, and just feeling when you kind of feel that relaxation response start to happen. The other piece I would say is it's actually really effective to do multiple cycles because you can count as you go. So let's say, 10 is a great number because again, it's easy to remember in the moment. But the beauty there is that when we count, we're not letting ourselves think all of these sort of catastrophic thoughts. We're also removing that kind of stressed out thought piece from it too, which in itself can be another amplifier, right? It's like oh my God, what if, all of that sort of stuff swimming around in your head. Just by counting, you can take the focus away from that. And that just sort of helps you to come back.
I love that. And it's funny because I remember my niece, she's super high achiever, applying for med school, I was already doing college credits in high school, the whole like super girl. And she started getting all these itises. And I remember going to her, I was like, do you have a breathing practice? And even though like I've always, I've been a yoga teacher, but I was never really a breathwork teacher. Yes, I could guide you through some simple pranayama, but that wasn't my focus. And this is why I also love the practice of yoga and wellness. Like it's so ample. Like I'm not going to pretend that I was an expert at any of them, at all of them. I'm sorry. So this is why we niche down, guys, right? We specialize. Meredith specializes in this. So I get to ask her all these, but I remember telling her, I was like, maybe just start a breathing practice. But now I'm like, focus on the exhale practices.
Yes.
Because again, not all breathing practices, even your class, the NeuroBoost, right? What you teach, it's actually an energizing breath. So before we go into that, I do want to talk about that. Okay. So we went from panic, focusing on exhales, counting, doing some repetitive breaths. Now tell me about maybe the two lower levels that we talked about.
Yeah, that's great. So if we think about it as in kind of more of just kind of baseline stress, right? Just the kind of stress where, you're not necessarily in that full blown panic, but you've just had a rough day, right? You're feeling agitated. You've got that kind of, full body activation, feeling kind of jangly, probably snapping at your loved ones, all of this stuff that can come along with that.
My 5-year-old, what?
Yes, even yogis do that. Right? Yeah. So that's where I find that really just, so that's actually one of my favorite types of breath work for that, or pranayama, would be coherent breathing. It's also been known as called the perfect breath. And so with coherent breathing, rather than extending the exhales, right? Because we're not in that kind of hyper breathing state. What we try to do is we try to balance the inhales and exhales instead. And there's actually what's been, the neuroscience has identified kind of the perfect rhythm. And the studies were actually done using neuroimaging, looking at the different activation patterns in the brain. And they found that this coherent breathing or perfect breath essentially would sync the brain waves. And so it's been found to both sync the brain activity between the hemispheres of the brain, and it also kind of reduces the the sort of agitation. And you can actually see that happening in people's brain waves. You can see them sort of switching into that more rested state. And what we're aiming for with the coherent breath is approximately 5 to 6 breath cycles per minute.
Okay.
So that corresponds to about 5 to 6 seconds per inhale and exhale. So we could actually just we could do a quick round of that.
Yeah, please.
Here. Would you be open to that? All right.
I never said no to breath.
Love it. So we're going to count again, just so we can balance the inhale with the exhale. So we're going to inhale through the nose here for 5 together. So let's just start inhaling here. 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to exhale for 5 out through the mouth or the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do one more round. Big inhale. And an exhale for 5. And just that, I don't know if about you, but just even in those 2 cycles, I automatically kind of felt that.
You're like, hey.
Yeah, just a little bit more chill. Everything does feel just a little bit more balanced. So you can imagine just taking 1 minute, right?
Yeah.
Where you're getting 5 or 6 of those nice balanced breath cycles into that minute. Can be a lovely way just to kind of shift the energy. That's sometimes something I'll do. I have a very long commute. Often I'll get home at the end of the day, long day, stuck in traffic, and get home. And it's that little transition, right? To switch over to then be able to be present with my loved ones at home. And just that 1 minute of coherent breathing.
And I want to stress that you just said 1 minute. So how many times, and for my peoples here, including myself, okay, have we assumed that we need 15 minutes, 10 minutes, or like, oh, I'm so stressed. And you're just like, oh, whatever, right? Like, whatever, I'm just going to keep moving along because like, I don't have time to, I've got my kid being like, mama, 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 mama. And I'm, trying to answer an email or whatever. And then the husband is like, hey, babe, 1 minute. Let me do a quick, hey, Siri, how many minutes in a day? How many minutes are there?
To convert from? 1,400. What would you like to convert from?
Great. There's 1,000.
Here's what I found.
Okay, Siri, thank you. 1,440 minutes.
Amazing. So you're talking about less than 1/10%.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that second part of the math, because I was about to, right? Like, how can we not give ourselves 1 minute? I feel like this could be the next book. Or maybe the first book. You don't have a book yet, but your book. Like, it could be like, 1 minute to balancing your life, or all it takes is 1 minute. Absolutely. Write that one down. Well, it's on the podcast. Guys, don't steal that. That's Meredith. And then ultimately mine, she'll give me a percentage of sales. But just kidding.
No, I love it.
But I love that. It's because, like, there's days that I look at my yoga mat and I'm like, I don't even want to see you today. Like, I had an accident like 2 years ago and around my rib cage, and I'm like, oh, down dog just feels like I'm going to hurt for days. So, like, asana for me has taken like a very big back burner. So to still embody yoga, breath, these are my practices. Like, I'll go kick my butt in the gym, make myself all tight, but then the inside of my body and my mind has to relax. So 1 minute. Cool.
Minute. Yeah, it makes me think. I remember I had a meditation teacher once who said, those who don't have time to meditate are the ones who need it the most, right? And it's so true, right? When we get into that state where we're like, I don't have time for these wellness practices, that's when you need them the most. And to be realistic, you need ones that are very short and that you can squeeze in. And 1 minute is enough to
it's a bare minimum, guys, right? Like.
And actually, I'll share the link with you, Ari, to share with your audience.
Yes.
I have a kind of a free guide to this called Micro Moments of Peace. And it's all about how we can use these tiny, tiny little practices. Really don't take much time at all, but just to fit in that little bit more peace in your day. So I'll be happy to share that.
Yes. Yeah. It'll be, all her links will be in the show notes. Meredith also has a podcast, and she leads these powerful retreats. I'm going to boast really quickly. So Meredith started working with me because she wanted to launch her first retreat, and we sold it out. Yeah. First retreat sold out. Winning.
So exciting. So exciting. Yeah. And we're actually going to be running that one again this summer, and we're already about half full. So
yeah, I'm so excited for you.
Huge thanks to Ari for making that happen.
I had to boast really quickly. So if you guys want my help, here's me doing self-promotion. Boom. So now we want to talk about the energetic breath, and the recording got dropped a little bit. So we're coming just right back into it. So go ahead, give us the lowdown. We're talking about that adrenaline fatigue.
That's right. Yeah. Adrenal fatigue. So yeah, again, chronic stress can actually kind of counterintuitively cause almost a depressed state or a total loss of energy. And so I'm really interested in developing both, movement and breathwork practices that actually help to boost energy, to give us that kind of positive feeling that, the energy that we need to be able to do all the things, but without activating the stress response or that sense of overwhelm. And so from yoga traditions, there's some wonderful pranayamas that can be used for this. One of my favorite is breath of joy. I often tell people this is like our kind of pranayama power pose that we can do to really kind of access that positive energy, again, while still staying in a kind of balanced and regulated state. So, and so I have a class called Neuroboost where we actually spend a whole hour kind of going through some of these different practices. Again, it's just another set of tools to have in your toolbox when you need that little extra boost for your day, but without, tipping into a sort of over caffeinated 3-ring circus juggling fire kind of thing that we spend so much of our time in. So, yeah.
Well, I'm a proud 1 cup of coffee a day drinker. I have enough energy for like 75 people apparently. So yes, if I need a little extra boost, I'd rather not go to caffeine. Plus, like I feel like there's been all these studies that are, you can, as a scientist, you can be like, well, I'm going to study why caffeine is bad for you. And then you could say, well, I'm going to study why caffeine is good for you. And then you're going to have 2 people being like, well, it's good for you. No, it's bad for you. No, it's good for you. Because I've heard both. But again, we want to stay in a coffee is acidic. So even if we not talk about caffeine, the acidity of the coffee on your digestive system is not as good as like a watermelon juice. So breath, a good energizing breath can be your, you guys know I'm from Peru, Miami girl here, your 3 p.m. cafecito instead of your 3 o'clock coffee. So now, Meredith, it's so easy to almost like forget about these practices, right? Because we're doing a million things, especially if we're not in the wellness industry. You're just I want to say you're just a regular person. I feel like, some of us who are at like full-time wellness, we're like aliens. So if you're just a regular person, what are like the top 3 that you can like keep in your pocket? Like you're like, one is, I think the perfect breath from what we talked about.
Yeah. Coherent breath. That would be your one for just kind of, regulating in the moment, but not necessarily for anxiety. Again, the extended exhale to get yourself out of that panic response can be really great. Another one of my favorite ones, and this is a very kind of traditional yogic breath or pranayama, is Nadi Shodhana. All right. And that's one that we use. Again, it has this kind of direct relationship to what's happening in terms of the activity in the brain. But this is our alternate nostril breathing that we can do as well. So this can be really great for, again, it's been shown to kind of balance the activation between the hemispheres. I also love it at this time of year as well, because it has the added benefit of kind of helping us to clear the nostrils, right?
Yeah.
To sort of get over that sort of stuffy nose breath as well. So I would say those are my personal top 3. But one thing I love is that pranayama is like yoga, right? It's this infinite well of wisdom. The more we learn, the more there is there to learn. And, there are literally thousands of breathing practices out there. And I feel like, it's like whatever it is you're going through, like there's a breath for that. So.
No, and it's true. There is a breath for that. Because I know when I was more into the what's it called? The Art of Pranayama, that book by Iyengar, is, you're just like, whoa. Now let's talk a little bit, like there's breaths that I remember one of my teachers, one of my guides, she was like, not everybody should be doing like deep breathwork practices. Like it could actually be like contraindicative to health issues. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think everybody's like, oh, let me just like, and this is me being like the mom. I went to this like huge marketing conference. Like, let's talk about like 2,000 to 3,000 people all in a conference room, right? In a stadium conference room. And most people, I'm going to say, okay, like I have to be careful with my words. A lot of these people didn't look like health and wellness was on their top priority. Okay. Well, that is enough, right? And up comes this guy to stage and he's like, all right, guys, I'm a biohacker and we're all going to do basically breath of fire. Mm-hmm. He had 2,000 to 3,000 people, in their chairs doing, it was like a breath of fire holotropic breathing. And I was like, this is not safe, bro. Like what you are doing should not be happening right now. You should have done simple, like a coherent breath. You could, like, there were so many other choices than like, like, what were you trying to do? Give somebody a heart attack? Like, so let's talk a little bit about that. Like who shouldn't do, or like what breath practices that, because nowadays you can Google, you can chat GPT, hey, chat GPT, what are some, give me some breathwork practices. And like, who knows what chat GPT is going to bust out for you, because it's not going to ask you, well, do you have, high blood pressure? Do you have low blood pressure? Like, is it 3 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. And I think, as breathwork has become more and more popular and more in the public consciousness, we are beginning to see this kind of intersection where some of these really quite specialized practices that are really meant for very specific circumstances, and for specific people, right? That these are becoming kind of widely available. And I kind of share your concern that sometimes we're potentially opening people up to harm in this way if they don't have the, the guidance or kind of the knowledge about it. One sort of, PSA, public safety announcement here is none of these should be performed while driving, right? I mean, this is kind of counterintuitive, but, anything where we're altering our breathing pattern does potentially, have a potential to sort of alter our consciousness there.
Yeah.
So, that's sort of point number one for safety. The other thing, there's a whole kind of family of breathing practices or pranayamas which are based around kind of the connected breath. Which is where we're inhaling and exhaling kind of without a break. And so holotropic breathing would sort of fall into this. It's really anything where we're almost kind of intentionally hyperventilating.
Right.
And those have a place, right? These types of breath work are really, really powerful. There's a rebirthing breath, which has been shown to really help people struggling with trauma, PTSD, this type of thing. So, again, these sort of more intense breath work, there's a place for it, but should be done with caution. I think a general piece of advice is it's fine to be playful, to be curious, to explore, some of these different practices, but we want to be really paying very close attention to our bodies as we're doing this. With the connected breath or anything where there's hyperventilating, I would say the number one risk factor is potentially you get hyperoxygenation, which can cause a loss of consciousness.
Yeah.
That's going to be preceded by dizziness. So yes. Just paying attention to yourself, noticing if you're starting to feel a little bit lightheaded as you're going through these. The easiest way to get out of it is you just stop, return to your normal breathing, and you'll restore your normal oxygen levels right away. So again, as long as we're doing it from this place of really being embodied, observing what we're feeling, and being ready to kind of return to normal breathing immediately, it can be done safely. But yeah, no, I think you bring up a really important point, is that all breathing practices are not appropriate all the time for all people.
Like if you're pregnant or if you're on your cycle, and look how crazy it is, guys. We're talking about breath, which is you don't think about breath, right? What is that called? Like a autonomic, right?
Yeah. So it's breath is fascinating, right? Because it's the one bodily function we have, which is going to happen whether we're paying attention to it or trying to modify it or not. Yeah. But we actually can take control of it, right?
Exactly.
It's really the only thing like that. I mean, we can feel our heart beating, but we can't really intentionally.
You can't be like, "Hey, heart."
Exactly. So the breath is kind of this amazing kind of master controller, in that it's going to happen whether we're intentionally doing it or not, but we can take control of it, and we can feel these really quite powerful physical changes and psychological changes too, by using the breath to regulate our stress as well.
It is so fascinating. And I really love this new exploration to breath. Like, for example, I did a cold plunge the other day, and I hate cold plunges, but I was like, no, let me do my breathing before, let me prepare. I remember you telling me about like the hands and the armpits, the lymphatic system. I was like, and I was in there, like, no problem. Like it was my job. And it was 50 degrees, which isn't, I know, like the lowest, like some people do like 35 degree, 40 degree, but I was also like not in the desire to freeze my butt off. I was like, I just need a little recharge. But I was like, the breath, it's all about like tuning in, listening, and finding this like equanimity in my breath. And I know I'm going to be fine, because I know most people, when they're doing cold plunges, panic, right?
That's right. And that's built in, right? I mean, physiologically, when we experience cold, that's how our body is sort of built.
Because you will die if you get stuck inside cold water. Like, you will go into hypothermia and die. So yes, it's normal. It's good.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you, Meredith, for joining us today. I think it was really informative, because I do feel like, even though yoga is now like when you go to a yoga class, you're not just doing asana most of the time. Like, people are incorporating more of this breath, but like, you're still not getting the full gamut of it. When you go to a yoga class, you're probably going to a yoga class and doing 95% movement and maybe 5% breath and shavasana. Like, I remember I taught at a place once, they were like, "No, you don't do shavasana." I was like, "What do you mean?" What do you mean? Like, okay. I was like, I don't think this is the place for me. It was a gym. So, it's great that we have retreats like yours, and now we have these, very specific breath practices that you have your micro moments. I know you lead series of breathwork, based breathwork meditation and some movement type classes. You did at the Yoga Expo. I really feel like if you guys are experiencing, let me find the right word. Curiosity is the right word, right? About how you can implement these practices, please reach out to Meredith, follow her on Instagram. She does these really great kind of like scientific minutes, and her podcast. What's your podcast called, by the way?
It's called Calm With Me.
Beautiful. So that's a great name.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
So she just launched, and we're very excited. We've been pushing her, a part of our group. Meredith, when are you launching the podcast? Meredith, when are you launching the podcast? So we're very excited that it's out there now. And, thank you, Meredith, for being this voice of this middle ground where like the whys, right? Like you guys kept me hearing why. And the more you understand something, the more likely it is that you will implement it. Because it reduces that skepticism, or like, oh, is this going to work for me? Or like, that's just a bunch of baloney. No, it's not baloney. It's actual science. Unfortunately, 4,000 years ago, when some of these practices were being created, there was no neuroimaging, and we just had to trust and experience and know the difference. And also, we know that the world is very different than what it was, 200 years ago. Because there is, we're information overload, speed overload. Everything needs to be, now. The patience level has dropped. Again, I live in Miami, and if you haven't started moving your car when the light just turned green, you are going to get honked at. So,
yeah.
We live in these kinds of worlds now, and that's why we really want to consider having some of these practices in our back pocket. Some of these opportunities to learn with experts like Meredith, and really give ourselves that gift. So.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. I think, really the basis of all science is observation, right? And it's about teaching people to feel empowered to observe themselves, right? Again, these practices, it's about finding the ones that work for you, really understanding your body, and understanding a little bit of the science behind it can just help us to know ourselves, right?
Yeah.
That much better. So.
I love it. Well, my darling, have a beautiful rest of your day. And for those of you, thank you for always tuning in. Please rate us, like us, do all the things that come with podcasting, and maybe share this episode with somebody that has been inquisitive, or maybe you think needs to learn more about breathwork, as I'm sure they'll benefit immediately. So we'll see you on the next episode, and thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.
Bye-bye.